Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something really fundamental, aren't we? Humanity's age-old questions about gods, where we came from, our origins.
Absolutely. It stretches right back to the earliest civilizations we know of.
Right.
And our goal here, really, is to use your sources to give you a kind of shortcut.
A shortcut through all that history.
Yeah, exactly. To see how those ancient beliefs didn't just vanish, but actually, shaped the major religions we see today. We're hoping to uncover some, well, frankly, surprising links.
And track how core ideas evolved over time. So how are we doing this? We've sifted through a whole stack of sources you provided, historical analyses, deep reads of ancient texts, archaeological findings.
A real mix.
Yep.
And we've tried to pull out the most powerful insights. So think of this as a journey, one that might challenge some assumptions about religious history.
Okay, let's dive in. The sources start us off at the dawn of deities, looking way back to antiquity.
Right. We're talking Sumerians, Egyptians, Babylonians, early Hebrews. These weren't simple cultures with simple beliefs. Your sources emphasize they had incredibly complex religious systems, governing systems too.
And advanced knowledge. Right. Maths, writing, astronomy even.
Definitely astronomy. Think about those massive structures aligned to the stars. The Sumerians in particular, your sources highlight them.
Oh, yeah. What stood out about them?
Well, their grasp of the solar system is pretty stunning for the time. Planetary orbits, the precession of the equinox, the cycle that determines seasons and constellations. It's quite sophisticated.
Wow. And the sources draw a direct line to today.
They make a pretty bold claim. If you worship a major personified god today, chances are its roots trace back to Sumeria as like a foundational blueprint.
That's huge. So not isolated beliefs, but something that's spread.
Very much so. The sources point out shared gods between Sumerians, Canaanites, Babylonians, even the early Hebrews. It's all interconnected.
Okay, that interconnectedness seems key. It sets the stage for how things changed later on.
Exactly. Which brings us right to unpacking the whole God question, specifically in the Bible. Your sources really dig into the evidence suggesting the Bible wasn't static.
It was changed multiple times.
That's what the archaeological and textual evidence suggests. And not just random changes, but often to support specific religious or, political goals.
How can you tell?
Just compare different versions. King James, NIV, the original Hebrew Torah. The translations, the interpretations, they shift, sometimes dramatically.
And the sources point to early Hebrew texts being, well, not monotheistic originally.
That's a major point. They highlight the word Elohim, used frequently before Moses' time. It's not singular. It comes from El or Elah, and it simply means gods.
Plural.
Gods.
Yeah.
So when the Bible mentions sons of God or the host of heaven,
That's the Elohim it's talking about. And get this, the sources point out that even in Genesis, after Adam and Eve's transgression, God sometimes refers to himself as us.
us, plural.
Which suggests Elohim originally described a whole pantheon. Your sources list figures like Adoni, Yahweh, Asherah, who is apparently Yahweh's consort.
A consort.
Yeah, and the head honcho, the father god, known as El Shaddai or Elyon. This makes the modern translations tricky.
How so?
Well, they often just slap God or Lord over all these distinct names, claiming they all mean the same thing. The sources are clear. That's not accurate. It obscures the original picture.
It changes the whole context. And speaking of context, the sources state pretty clearly that Abraham and his family were, well, pagan.
Factually pagan, yes. They worshipped many of the same gods as the Canaanites and Sumerians. So when the Bible says God, it could mean Sumerian deities like Enlil, Enki, Ninurta, Marduk, even a goddess, Aya Ashariah. Elohim was the collective term.
Okay, but Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they shifted focus.
They did. Your sources show they became particularly devoted to that father god, Elyon. And here's where it gets really interesting, the connections.
Connections to other cultures, right? The Sumerians called him En, or sometimes Enlil, the storm god. Babylonians knew him as El, or LL. Canaanites, like the Hebrews, called him Leon. That name, El, it's a powerful title in ancient Semitic languages. Sort of signifies ultimate divinity.
And this El, or Elyon, it's hidden in plain sight in modern Bibles.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It's often scrubbed from the main text, but your sources point out it's still there as a suffix in tons of names. Emmanuel, Ishmael, Israel, Ezekiel, Daniel, Bethel, Raphael, Michael, Gabriel.
All those familiar names.
Yeah. And the sources even suggest that's the origin of the word angel, from El.
So why isn't El highlighted more? Where did that emphasis go?
Well, to trace that, your sources lead us somewhere interesting. The Phoenicians,
Right.
seafaring people, spoke Paleo-Hebrew.
And their gods.
They worshiped personified planets mostly,
Hmm.
and the farthest one they could see, Saturn. So Saturn became their most high god, and their name for Saturn, El.
The same title. So some historians connect the Hebrew Elyon and God Most High with Saturn.
Exactly, because of that shared title and status. And the sources add another layer. Ninurta, who was Enlil's son, was also linked to Saturn. So there's this historical correlation, though, mainstream theology often pushes back against it.
Okay, interesting. Let's shift gears slightly. What about those sons of God taking human wives? The sources had a different take on that, right? Not fallen angels.
Right, that's a later interpretation. The original texts, according to your sources, just say sons of God or host of heaven, which were
The Elohim, the gods we were just talking about.
precisely. And what's telling is that same plural word, Elohim, which gets translated as God so often, is also used to describe false gods. The sources flag that as a kind of, a hint that information might be hidden or simplified.
A red flag. Okay. This sounds like where Zechariah Sitchin comes in, his translations.
Exactly, his Lost Book of Enki specifically. It contains English translations of Sumerian tablets. And the key thing, these tablets are thousands of years older than the Bible, but they tell stories that sound incredibly familiar.
Like biblical stories.
Yeah, creation, the flood, parallels. Now, we need to be careful here. The sources acknowledge some of Sitchin's own interpretations, like his whole 12th planet theory, were speculative. We're setting that aside for this deep dive.
Got it. So focusing on the translations themselves.
Right. His work translating the cuneiform and showing links between ancient myths is valuable, regardless of his other theories. So, what do these tablets say?
What's the Sumerian version?
They talk about Anu and his sons, Enki and Enlil. In Babylon, they were called Ea and El. These gods supposedly came from the heavens, and they created humans for one reason,
Which was
to be slaves.
a workforce.
Okay, and Adam and Eve.
Here's where it gets wild. The tablets suggest Enki basically took DNA from an evolved ape, Homo erectus, mixed it with his own, and created Adamu and Tiamat, Adam and Eve.
Merging DNA, yeah.
But Anu had put Enlil in charge of Earth, not Enki. So big rivalry there. Enki then rebels, apparently, and upgrades humanity.
Yeah.
Gives them free will, the ability to procreate. That's supposedly when Abel was born.
And the sons of God mating with humans. The sources say that fits right in. Enki, Enlil, Marduk, another god, they all mated with humans. That's the Sumerian explanation for the biblical sons of God marrying the daughters of man.
And Enlil wasn't happy about humans getting these upgrades.
Furious, according to the texts. He saw it as a major overstep. And that anger, the Sumerian narrative says, is what led to the expulsion from the Garden of Eden.
So these iconic stories, Eden, Adam and Eve, Noah, they existed before the Bible.
Way before. Your sources point to things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is over 1,000 years older than the relevant parts of the Bible. It has a flood story, very detailed. And the Enuma Elish.
The Babylonian creation story.
Right, from before 1100 BCE. A lot of the Genesis creation narrative seems to stem directly from that.
And the conflicts didn't stop there. Wars between the gods.
Oh, no. The Sumerian texts describe Enlil and Enki fighting it out across the Middle East. Their kids got involved too, like Marduk, Enki's son. More battles. Enlil apparently grew to hate humans so much.
He decided on the fly.
Yeah, wiped the slate clean. But Enki, still kind of rebellious and maybe fond of his creation, told Noah-Ziusudra in Sumerian to build an ark, save humanity and the animals. That's the Sumerian flood story.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. How does Yahweh emerge from all this? The sources link it to Abraham, right?
They do. The narrative presented is that Enlil specifically chose Abraham and his family, revealed himself as a most high god, and started planning attacks against Enki, using Abraham's descendants, his chosen people, as his ground troops, essentially.
And that test, asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac.
The sources interpret that as Enlil confirming Abraham's absolute loyalty, making sure he picked the right guy for his plans. He stopped him only after Abraham proved he'd obey blindly.
That's a different lens. Now, the name Yahweh itself, it wasn't always prominent?
Apparently not.
Yeah.
Your sources say it was almost unknown until authors started re-editing the Torah, the first 5 books, around 950 BCE. It's pretty widely accepted by historians now that Moses didn't write the whole Torah himself.
Right, the idea of it being compiled from older sources,
Yeah,
pseudographical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like the documentary hypothesis suggests, it wasn't one author one time. And in these edited versions, Moses is portrayed as replacing the old gods, like El Shaddai or Baal, with his new one, Yahweh Sebaoth.
The Israeli god of war.
The god of war, yes. Also known as Jehovah, but
Yeah.
that's a later mistranslation issue.
So why does Yahweh seem so contradictory sometimes in the Bible. Merciful one minute, wrathful the next.
That's a great question. Your sources offer an explanation from older Hebrew mythology. Yahweh wasn't originally the top god himself, but more like a title for the head angel, the channel through which the ultimate universal god, Aya Ashariah, spoke.
So that explains the conflicting personalities and the confusion between God and angel of the Lord.
It could. If Yahweh was sometimes the messenger and sometimes perceived as the source, it creates that ambiguity we see in the text. It makes the interchangeable use of God and angel make more sense.
And Baal, that wasn't a specific god's name either.
Correct. Baal just means master or lord. It was a title applied to various gods. But because this new war god, Yahweh, was positioned against the gods, the Babylonians often called Baal.
The title got stuck to the enemy god.
Pretty much. It stopped being used for Yahweh and became associated with a separate opposing deity. This whole period also coincides with a big shift in, well, astrotheology.
Astrology, how does that fit in?
The ages were changing. The age of Taurus, the bull, was ending. The age of Aries, the ram, was beginning. Think about Moses destroying the golden calf.
The bull making way for the ram or the lamb.
Precisely. A symbolic shift reflecting the changing cosmic cycles, as understood back then.
Okay, so Age of Aries begins. How does this connect to the rise of monotheism, or at least the focus on one god?
Well, in this new age, the sources say the god Marduk started his ascent. Remember him? Enki's son. He supposedly stole the right to rule Earth from Enlil's son, Ninurta.
Marduk, wasn't he associated with Jupiter?
He was, which echoes the Greek myth, right? Jupiter overthrowing Saturn. It's a parallel power shift narrative.
And the Egyptians, did they adopt Marduk?
They recognized him as Amun, or later Amun-Ra. We often think of Ra just as the sun god, but the sources clarify that's a later fusion. Marduk, as Amun, wasn't initially a sun god. He only really merged with Ra after a specific pharaoh.
Akhenaten.
Before him, actually. But the real boost came later. First, there's this interesting period around 2030 BCE where Babylonian myths seem to flood into Egypt, replacing older Egyptian ones.
Suggesting Babylonian influence on the priesthood. Maybe from those dispersed magi from Babel.
That's the connection the sources suggest, that the Egyptian priesthood had roots in the Babylonian magi. Then comes Akhenaten, pharaoh of the 18th dynasty.
And he did something radical.
Totally radical. He basically introduced monotheism, or something very close to it. He pushed this idea of free thought, elevating one god, Aten, as the only true god, Aten-Ra.
And said priests weren't needed anymore. I bet that went down well.
Not at all. Huge upheaval. But your sources call this the first true sign of monotheism in human history. Aten was linked to light, symbolized by the sun disk.
But it didn't stick.
No. After Akhenaten died, the old guard came back, re-established the pagan gods, but they cleverly absorbed Aten's symbol, the sun disk, into Ra worship. Ra became Aten-Ra.
Did Akhenaten anticipate that?
Seems like it. He apparently set up mystery schools, the Theraputan Brotherhood, the Essenes, to try and preserve his teachings secretly.
But the priesthood infiltrated them.
According to the sources, yes. And they created counter schools, twisting the teachings, demonizing them, even committing awful acts in the name of the original schools to discredit them. Psychological warfare, the sources call it.
Left eye of Ra, right eye of Ra, left hand, right hand paths.
That's the occult connection, yeah. They tried hard to erase Akhenaten and Aten from history, though evidence survived, like in the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
And Marduk, or Aten, was positioned as the ultimate god during this time.
He was given this universal image, yes. The Sumerian sources say Marduk claimed to be god of gods, demanding worship of his image above the all, the absolute. He basically told everyone he was the god of creation and all gods before and after him. Very confusing for people.
So the enslavement of the Hebrews in Egypt, how does that fit?
The sources frame it as part of this ongoing cosmic battle. Marduk's side, the Aten-Ra priesthood, enslaving Enlil's people. Then Enlil's son, Ninurta, uses Moses to free them.
And Ninurta appears to Moses as Yahweh.
Yes, choosing that name, the war god title, instead of El Shaddai, specifically to recruit Moses for the Enlilite forces against Marduk and Ra.
Which brings us back to the Bible's portrayal of Yahweh, demanding bloodshed, causing death, deception, favoritism.
All those difficult passages.
Yeah.
The sources point them out directly. A man of war, thriving on brutal animal sacrifices, just like Enlil's was said to, very much like the Greek Zeus in temperament.
Which might explain why the Israelites kept backsliding, wanting to worship Baal and Asherah again after the conflict.
It could suggest a certain disillusionment, perhaps, a reaction to the harsh demands of this particular deity portrayal.
Okay, this is complex. How did this lead to the grand unification the sources talk about? the birth of modern religion as we know it.
It starts in Babylon. They pioneered this idea of monolatry, worshiping one god above others, even if you acknowledge others exist. They put Marduk right at the top of their pantheon. This is while Judaism was still pretty polytheistic.
But then came King Josiah in Israel around 622 BCE.
Huge turning point. Josiah has his high priest forge the law of Moses, the book of Deuteronomy, specifically to promote monolatry in Israel.
Forge it. Why?
To rally the Israelites around their war god, Ninurta, now called Yahweh, to give them a chance against Babylon's war god, Marduk. It was a strategic move. And that, the sources say, is why polytheistic elements still remain in our Bibles. It also marks the real start of the Yahwists.
But Israel still fell to Babylon, like Jeremiah predicted.
They did. Judah lost, Israelites exiled. And the Babylonians, of course, said, see, our god Marduk beat your god Yahweh. It was framed as Marduk's final victory over the Israelite forces.
And Marduk, as and Ra, kept consolidating power, changing history.
Exactly. Altering Egyptian records to glorify himself, claiming to be the only god. And during the exile, the Israelites were immersed in Babylonian culture, including the Enuma Elish.
Which influenced their own texts.
Profoundly. Biblical authors re-edited Genesis again, adding that second creation story, the one starting in Genesis 2.4. It mirrors Marduk's narrative and actually contradicts the first Genesis story in places.
And they started attributing Marduk's deeds to Yahweh.
Yes, like slaying Leviathan and Tiamat. That's when the name Yahweh got permanently glued to the figure who was, in essence, the Babylonian Marduk, completely overriding the original connection to Ninurta.
So how did true monotheism finally emerge? Beside me there is no God.
That comes with 2nd Isaiah, a prophet writing under Babylonian rule. He adds his book, really establishing the God of Abrahamic faiths as we conceive him today, with that absolute declaration, I am the first and I am the last. Beside me there is no God.
And then more editing of the Old Testament.
One last major pass, it seems. The priestly source, P, went back through and basically smoothed things over. Explained that El Shaddai, Elyon, Elohim, Erten, Adoni, they were all just different names for Yahweh. It unified the narrative under the Marduk Yahweh figure.
Just like the Egyptians and Babylonians had done with their own pantheons.
Exactly. So, through all these layers of editing and reinterpretation, the Old Testament ended up replacing the original Elohim pantheon, El Shaddai, Ashira, the others with Marduk, now wearing the Yahweh label.
And the original true Hebrew name for the ultimate god, Aya Ashariah, got lost.
Almost completely removed, according to your sources. Which is why today, Christians, Jews, Muslims often refer to all those Old Testament gods simply as Yahweh or God or Allah. Marduk, the god of 50 names, effectively won the branding war. The sources state he deceived humanity into worshiping him above all others.
Wow. Okay, so looking beyond that historical veil, astrotheology again, and this idea of the absolute.
Right. As the age of Aries closed, those original Jewish teachings faded further. The age of Pisces was dawning, eventually symbolized by Christians some 700 years later. Lamb of God slain, fishers of men.
And this whole history, it's not about discrediting faith, but showing how it was occulted, hidden or altered.
That's the argument in the sources, that the original Hebrew mythology got reshaped after the Babylonian exile, which is why the Bible, read literally or exoterically, can seem to promote a god who was once just one part of a pantheon.
So, contrary to just being one god, among many who made it big, the Israelites originally had a concept of something much grander.
Yes, this omnipresent existence, Aya Ashariah, I am that I am. Your sources present this as the true ultimate Hebrew concept of God, the foundation upon which all those personified deities were later built.
Like Brahman in Hinduism, or the All in Hermetics.
Exactly. Similar concepts across cultures. The enlightenment in Buddhism, that core essence, it suggests a shared primordial understanding.
And astrotheology was the original language for this, before the age of Taurus.
Your sources propose it was humanity's original unifying religion. The Garden of Eden, the Golden Age, Treta Yuga, the Age of Perfect Virtue. Different names for the same primordial understanding, often expressed through cosmic cycles.
And the god stories were allegories, personifying planets and stars, but relating them to human behavior, spirituality.
That was the original understanding, it seems. Hebrew astrotheology specifically described the nature of Aya Ashariah through these cosmic myths.
But that became dangerous for empires like Babylon.
Apparently so. This deep esoteric knowledge empowering individuals wasn't good for control. So they copyrighted spirituality, as the sources put it, by making the gods more human-like, attaching specific personalities, and crucially insisting the myths were literal history, not allegory.
Why literal history?
Control. If your God is presented as a historical figure who commands war, causes destruction, shows favoritism, then the masses feel justified, even obligated, to participate in similar worldly power games, what the sources call elite divide and conquer techniques.
So making God in man's image almost to justify man's actions.
In a way, yes. So the sources conclude that when Babylon conquered Israel and reshaped their religion, the God most people know today as Yahweh was effectively born in that new controlling image. Religion became a tool of state control thanks to this original war on spirituality waged by the Babylonian priesthood.
That is a lot to take in, an incredibly complex, tangled history of belief, power, and storytelling. It certainly makes you look at familiar texts and traditions differently.
It absolutely does. It highlights how fluid these concepts have been, how interconnected the ancient world was, and how much interpretation and, well, revision has shaped what we believe today. It's a
Yeah.
profound perspective shift.
So the final question for you, listening. How does grasping these layers, the mythology beneath the history, the shifting identities of gods, the potential agendas behind the texts, how does that change your view, your perspective on faith, power, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and where we came from?
Yeah, it's something to really mull over. We definitely encourage you to continue your own deep dive, maybe go back to some familiar religious texts, but this time look at them with these new historical and mythological lenses. See what you discover.